Hello and welcome to my channel, where I am producing content for Amplitude Studios' upcoming 4X game, Humankind. While I'm currently working on my tier list videos for the game's cultures that we've seen so far, I'd also like to break up the humdrum a bit and peer into the future by taking a look at the contemporary cultures that we haven't yet been able to play. Instead of tiering these cultures, I've recorded my live reaction to each culture, and I'll discuss a bit how I see them performing and being played when the game is fully released. Being live will also help give some insight into how I think about the different use cases for the cultures and show some of the initial thought processes I use when thinking about how strong or weak a given culture is. Although nothing we've seen so far is final, so I can't represent my final thoughts on any culture, this goes doubly so for the contemporary era cultures since we haven't been able to play them. Instead, we're just having some fun speculating and finding out what to expect in the last era of play. You can find timestamps for each culture below. Hope you enjoy. Hey, welcome. This is going to be a live look at some of the contemporary era cultures. We haven't been able to play these in the game yet, so we're just going to take a look at some of these traits, emblematic units, emblematic quarters, see how they stack up, see how they might work with some other things. So, these live impressions are preliminary. We haven't been able to play with any of these, like I said, and we're probably not going to have complete information about them either. So you can see we're on the Humankind fandom that I will sometimes refer to as the wiki, I'm sure. But, we only have the information that's available here. So we're going to base our impressions on that, and there may be some missing information. The other thing we don't know is the tech tree, which limits our ability to make some assumptions about these cultures. So we don't know how many different units there are. Like the Soviets, I know, have the special tank unit, but we're not sure if it's kind of like Civ 6, where you have like regular tanks and then you get more modern tanks later into the tech tree, that kind of stuff. So there are some limiting factors, and it's part of why I'm not doing a tier list for this. And obviously, we don't really know how the contemporary era plays yet. So let's just start with the Americans, since they're the first here. Let's see what they get. Okay. It's beautiful art, by the way. That looks great. All right, so the trait, American exceptionalism, plus 10 influence on resources being traded. And, okay, they're an expansionist culture. Okay, so first impression of this is not very good. In the late game, and you really start to notice this in the industrial and even the pre-modern, that the expansionist stars can get really hard to get. You need a lot of territory, and that means you have to go to war a lot. What that also means is that you're unlikely to have as many trading partners. So it is a little counterintuitive. I I don't know how this is going to play out in practice. We haven't seen the final scaling yet in the contemporary era, so maybe there is that possibility to make use of that. And that would also combine really nicely with the Venetians, where they get some extra influence on their trade routes, though it could be a little bit overkill. Let's see. Emblematic quarter is the is the defense agency, which looks like a garrison type thing, which I'm not fond of. So let's take a look. Okay, minus sensibility like normal, +2 combat strength in combat for units adjacent to the district, and +2 influence per adjacent garrison. Okay, I see. So this thing is you're meant to plop it down in the middle of a bunch of garrisons so that you get the garrison combat strength bonus as well as the combat bonus from the defense agency, so you can stack a couple bonuses on top of each other to defend yourself. Yeah, I kind of go back to my whole garrison thing, which is just that they're not that impactful, particularly as an expansionist culture where you're going to be attacking people rather than defending yourself most of the time. And +2 influence per adjacent garrison? I mean, are you really going to have a donut of garrisons to place this in? I don't know. I don't buy this. So I'm not impressed so far. I'm not impressed. I think I would have preferred something that really allows for military force projection. And going into the industrial era, you can start to see how important that is as your empire gets bigger, right? And the Americans specifically are really known for their ability to be anywhere in the world with their military, right? If you're going for that sort of military angle, which it looks like the game is. So I think I would have preferred to see something like an airbase slash train station kind of thing that you can like build in allied territory that you can use to project your force to other places you wouldn't be able to normally reach very rapidly. I think it would be useful and also thematic for the Americans to be able to do something like that, right? With you could call it a military base or something. So yeah, defense agency. I don't know. I mean, there is a little bit of benefit to this in that the later you build a district that exploits stuff, the less valuable it is because you're not getting the benefits from those exploitations over the course of the game. So you could see in like the very late contemporary era, like people building a bunch of garrisons on their borders with some like defense agencies around, but I am not really sold on that. So let's take a look at their unit. I hope the unit's good. The Lightning. Looks like it's modeled after the F-35. A pretty expensive production, 11,340. We don't know how that's going to scale yet. What's the resources on this? So 3 oil, 3 aluminum, and a uranium. So 7 total resources. See, it's a multi-role aircraft, so versatile, which can perform both patrols and airstrikes effectively. So I guess it's good at both attacking enemy air units as well as striking ground units. Aerial stealth can perform anonymous strikes. I'm not sure what that means. My guess would mean that unless you have a unit that can detect stealth, that the lightning can attack a target without being retaliated against. But I don't see what else that could be. Yeah. Let's see. 66 combat strength, 20 range. That's pretty far. So, first impression of this. So, first, I think this tells us something about the contemporary era, which is that there are probably going to be multiple tiers of aerial units because the Lightning that they're representing here, which seems to have some like F-22 Raptor features to it, the contemporary era is likely to have a few tiers of aircraft, and the Lightning's probably in that last tier. So perhaps this will be dominant against some of the other aircraft in the game. I suspect it will be, and you can use it multi-role. I'm a little concerned about these resource requirements down here. We've seen in like the open devs and the beta that there's always like this new world kind of continent that tends to have like half the resources on the map. So you might struggle a little bit to get those resources. That 20 range is pretty good though. And I suspect that aircraft are going to be fairly important, but we haven't gotten a good sense of that yet. 66 combat strength. So the thing about an air unit, if you can strike people with it and not be retaliated against, your total strength relative to the other unit isn't as important because you're not taking damage yourself. So this could be weaker than some of the ground combat units and still be relatively effective. Huh. So overall, first impression here. Yeah, I think this would have been a lot better as a militarist. I don't see how the trait and the defense agency really make for an effective expansionist. And you really might struggle to make use of that trait. Now the lightning might be good. We don't have anything to compare it against, at least as far as like generic units go. The Japanese have their zero, so we can compare to that in a few minutes. But yeah, I'm not super impressed. And maybe the lightning's good enough that the Americans are are more viable, kind of like the Morians with their elephants. Um, but yeah, I don't have much more to add to that one, I think. So let's look at the next culture. So let's see, we have Australians who are builders. Okay. So just a note on the builders, which, like I said before, because outputs decrease in later eras, um, the builders are might not be as valuable because you're not going to be building as many districts producing outputs, I suspect. Okay, so first is the Dreamweaver's trait, which is plus 20% industry on all cities. Wow, that's awesome. Um, so we haven't seen like the final scaling of industry yet, but in the closed beta, you could get to 12, 1500 industry, even like 2000 if you were really going hard on it. So plus 20% industry is pretty significant. Let's compare that to the Lightning production costs. So that's 11,340 industry. So if you have, say, 2,000 industry base and you're getting that extra 20%, that's an extra 400 production. Does that actually save you any turns? I think it must, right? And that's going to be divided by 2,400. So this is just an example to get like a relative production cost. So about 5 turns divided by 2,000. Yeah, so it saves you a turn on producing that. What about their... Look at this more later. So that's substantially less expensive. So if you have a base of 2,000 production in one of your cities, so that's... Oh, I did the wrong thing there. So that's... I did it again. There we go. So 3 turns, base. 2 turns base. Yeah, I mean, okay. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how much that's going to impact your ability to actually build things. And it seems like it could be pretty good. And obviously, on its face, that 20% industry is going to be pretty useful. If we go to the cultures, right, there are a lot of cultures that give you bonuses to industry as well from the previous eras, right? So you get the Egyptians, you get the Maya, who get some extra production, and then you also have cultures that give you more food, which help you support more workers, like the Celts. The Khmer kind of do both wherever they are, right here. The Mughals are obviously really good with the Jama Masjid, where you get more industry per worker. So there are a lot of synergies with that plus 20% production that you can take advantage of. The Siamese, to a lesser extent, with that extra production on traders. So that's going to be pretty useful, I think. Much better than the American Strait. Emblematic quarter strip mining complex. Okay, plus 10 industry as a base, minus sensibility as usual, plus 50 industry per adjacent strategic resource deposit. Do we know anything else about this? You built once per territory. It's instantly unlocked. Okay, so you get it as soon as you get into contemporary. All right, that seems to be all we know. Yeah, this looks like it can provide a lot of industry. You're going to be a little limited. So if you, assuming this has an adjacency requirement to other quarters, because pretty much every emblematic quarter in the game has that, other than some of the garrisons, then that means your strategic resources are going to need to be adjacent to your city. So you won't be able to take advantage of that if you have like an island chain that's attached to one of your cities that has a strategic resource on it. You won't be able to place a mining complex down unless your outpost is right there. But it does provide a pretty substantial amount of production. So let's do a little math here. Let's say you have just 4 strategic resources, which is a really conservative estimate, and you're able to put the strip mining complex next to all of them. So that's going to be 60, not divided. That's going to give 240, yeah. So that's 240 industry And then you also get the 20% bonus from being the Australians. So just from putting 4 of these down next to strategic resources, you're getting almost 300 production, which isn't too bad. As a percentage of your production, that comes out to like, depending on where you were, maybe a 10%-ish boost. Do we know how much this costs to create? No. So if it costs too much to create, it might not be worth it. And in the contemporary era specifically is probably going to be the most warfare-filled era of any of the eras. As, players are going to try to knock each other out and steal era stars from other people by like capturing cities to get their agrarian stars and all that kind of stuff. So overall, pretty good, I think. We'll have to see what the meta kind of looks like in the contemporary era, but much more impressive than the Americans. All right, emblematic unit, all-terrain PMV. Actually, I had a tab open for that already. Let's close a few of these. All right, the all-terrain PMV. So only a 1 population cost, a little under 6,000 production. It is an armored vehicle, strong against close-ranged attacks. So does that mean that, for instance, there are units that have like a close range that they can attack from and these are strong against it? Or does it mean that they get sort of like a combat strength defensive bonus against units that are close to them? I'm not sure. We'll have to find out. All-terrain, ignores all-terrain movement penalties. Okay, so this thing can like, ignore the movement penalties from rivers and that kind of stuff. All right, interesting. One thing I don't know yet, and I don't think anyone does unless you're part of Amplitude, is whether or not armored vehicles are going to have the same drawback as cavalry, where cavalry can't enter cities, right, unless you destroy the fortification, because that pretty significantly reduces how well you're able to use them. And in the contemporary era, the Australians and everyone else, you're all going to have big cities. So they're going to take up proportionally more tiles than they did in all the earlier eras. So hopefully the armored vehicles will be able to just enter cities, maybe with like a combat strength debuff. There is a bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? There is a bit of an upside though, even if they can't enter cities, which is that in the contemporary era, you can build stuff like, fairly powerful artillery and all that. And that can allow you to knock down the walls really quickly, so you can make more use of these if they're unable to cross fortifications. They also have a pretty high base movement of 8. Resource requirements, 3 oil might be a little troublesome, but that 2 iron's not too bad. That's a pretty old resource that you've had online since like the classical era. Yeah, okay. It seems like an okay unit. Part of the problem with judging the units, again, is that we don't know what the generic units look like in this era, so it's kind of hard to compare against them. So we can only really compare against other units of a similar class. All right, let's take a look at the next culture, the Brazilians. Let's see what we have. So the cultures are agrarian. So right off the bat, the affinity action, greener pastures, it's not going to be as useful in the contemporary era where you have really big cities. Like proportionally, you're going to be getting fewer pops than you had in previous eras. You can still get a little boost every time you click the button, and you should be able to do it pretty frequently. But yeah, it'll just be okay. It's not like a god tier affinity action like it was in the ancient and classical. All right, trait. Oh boy, okay. +2 food per farmer, +2 industry per worker, +2 money per trader, and +2 science per researcher. Wow. So, okay, let's say you have a city with 60 pops and whoops, they're all, working different, whatever outputs they're working. You're getting a total of plus 120 output on that city, just like right off the bat. And it's the output of your choice, whatever you want it to be. And then if you have multiple cities, that increases more. And this also stacks with stuff like the Greeks, right, who get +2 science per researchers. Interesting. So yeah, this really plays into like a super high population strategy where you want to have a lot of outputs. So if you've taken a lot of agrarians in the past, so say you have like the Celts and you took the Franks, where you're going to have these really high population cities, that seems like a really good option for you. All right, emblematic quarter is the agronomy lab. -10 stability is normal. +3 food per adjacent farmer's quarter in the farmer slot. And then this is what really stood out, the +1 food per population. So this is another quarter like the Celts, right, where you get a ton of food. And yeah, if you have your city where you built your 3 nematins earlier, and then you get your 3 agronomy labs, you're supporting so much population. And then the farmers are getting you a little more food as well. I will say that this late in the game, the value of the FIMS output is decreased a bit, and there is like a maximum growth that you can have on your cities. So you may be approaching the point of redundancy with this. We'll have to get a little more playtime in like the late industrial and early contemporary period to get a feel for how good this is going to be. My gut instinct is that it is going to be somewhat useful, but it's not as useful as getting the extra food 2 or 3 eras before. Jungle brigades. I will obviously the +1 food per population, just like the traits, that combines well with cities that are going to have a large population. So let's look at these emblematic units. The jungle brigade. Okay, gunner unit. Okay, so normal stuff. Master ambusher provides increased ambusher bonuses when on difficult terrain tiles. Okay, it doesn't tell us how much. 57 strength, 4 movement, 720 production. That's really cheap compared to some of the other stuff we've seen. See if we can learn more about this master ambusher. Master ambusher. Provides increased no, it doesn't say anything. I know there's a regular ambusher trait. What's that give? +4. Okay, so presumably master ambusher is going to be better than ambusher, right? So let's assume master ambusher is like a +6. And it's when you're on difficult terrain tiles. I can't remember everything that is defined as difficult. There's a thing on terrain. So I assume this is going to be things like forests and rivers. This will have the same problem as some of the other, as like cavalry before, where because cities take up more and more of the space in the game, the jungle brigades might struggle to really find a benefit from their master ambusher because you're going to have more city. And honestly, we haven't seen much in Humankind yet in the way of like really sprawling like jungles and that kind of stuff. We have seen like that there was a band of forest sort of crossing the northern part of the world in the recent open beta. And that wasn't super good for cities either. So these might be good in like the sort of empty spaces between player cities if there's some difficult terrain there. Assuming a +6, you get up to 63 combat strength, which I think that the PMV was 64, and it costs 5, 6, 7 times as much production to produce and has higher upkeep. So, yeah, these seem very situational to me. That really low production is good, but that combat strength isn't very impressive. And what was it? The lightning? It seems like you have a 66 strength, if the Americans, for instance, have the rights buffs, you're in danger of getting your units one shot because they're too low combat strength. Yeah, we'll have to see how map generation looks. These are going to be really dependent on how your map looks. Um, yeah, all right. I'm sure there's like a general infantry unit in this era. We'll have to see how they compare to that as well and like where in the tech tree they are. Because even like a +1 or +2 combat strength can, over a generic unit, can make them a little bit better. So Brazilians overall, yeah, I mean, I would play them most likely with a high population culture because you're gonna boost all the FIMs that you love to have, which is all of them. You get the extra food, so you can support a higher population, but that might not be as relevant in the contemporary. Um, yeah, I don't see a major downside to this other than these jungle brigades, which are going to be a little more dependent. But with FIMS outputs from this and your high population, it might not matter so much. You might be able to get by with just generic units. So next you have the Chinese. Let's see what we got. Okay, the merchant culture. So you're going to be trading. Yeah, I do think the merchant culture is going to decline in value pretty substantially in the last era because of the amount of warfare. Again, we'll see how that meta plays out. That's just my intuition at this point. So, trade Silk Road. Plus 50% money generated from ongoing trade on all cities. Wow, that is a lot. Trade is a little opaque in terms of how much it actually generates. Let's see if we can get a little bit more information. So you have the cost for strategic. Yeah, okay, infrastructure effects, double money income from trade routes, blah, blah, blah. I think it depends on, the specific resource and a few other things, as it does with the strategics right here. So it's a little opaque how that actually works, but this brings to mind quite a few different things that it can combine with really well if you're going for a gold-based strategy. And most of them are listed here, I think. So not those, is it the Axumites or the Ghanaians that have the plus 10%? I think it's the Axumites that get plus 10% money on ongoing trade, so that would stack. And then you have the Satrap Palace from the Achaemenids that gives you +3 money per number of trade routes. You have the +3 money per number of trade routes from the luxuries market with the Ghanaians. Yeah, here it is for the Axumites. So that's a trade-off between the Axumites and the Achaemenids and the Carthaginians, who will reduce your buyout cost. So there's a lot of potential synergy there if you've been pursuing a gold buyout strategy for most of the game. Okay, what's next? People's Congress. +10 money, -10 stability, +3 influence per adjacent market quarter. Okay, it looks like we don't care about those as much. The real effect of this is that you get +1 of each of your slots. So what I suspect, again, this is going to be good for, are cultures that have a high population and have so much growth that they really need to find jobs for all their pops. This is a very population-oriented quarter. Because if you're not at your population cap as far as how many districts your pops can be working, you're not going to get a lot of use out of this. Like +10 money and some influence isn't going to be very influential this late in the game. So that's interesting. How does that change my evaluation of this trait? So I still think the all the ones I mentioned before are still a good combination with that. It's just a matter of whether or not you can take advantage of this as well. So if we look at the agrarian cultures, you can take the Celts, but then you're sacrificing probably some of your best combinations. Maybe you go for the Haudenosaunee, or Haudenosaunee, I believe. that extra food from your farmers is going to help, and you get it for number of territories. So you're a little bit of a taller play style. And then in the industrial, you have the Mexicans as well, which give you that 20% food on all cities and some more food from the hacienda. So I can see a situation where you take a very specific strategy where you go like the probably the Nubians into the Achaemenids or the Carthaginians or maybe even the Celts, picking up the Ghanaians, and then eventually rounding out with some more agrarians to go into the Chinese, and that'll give you both those money money combination you need, as well as the population you need to take advantage of these slots. Because pops are really good at the end of the game as you get more infrastructure. Um, so, yeah, it's odd. That's a very specific combination that I think you need to really take full advantage of all these different traits. Let's look at the unit, the Guardians. So this looks like some kind of artillery. Heavy weapon. Okay, ranged combat unit must have line of sight to attack. Can destroy fortified tiles, but can't retaliate when attacked by a close combat unit. With entrenching tool, gains dug in. What's entrenching tool? Is that just yeah, just some kind of passive innate to them? They get dug in, which kind of gives them like a little combat strength buff on the defense, and that's only if they don't move. Multi-rocket bombard. Can use the bombard action twice per turn. Okay, so this is like this is basically an artillery that can attack twice. So this is the final evolution of the Mongol horde, it seems. So resources, +2 oil, plus, let's see, 1 aluminum and 2 uranium. Okay. So that's pretty comparable production to that Australian all-terrain PMV. 60 strength. Yeah, so because, these are going to be pretty far back in your line, it doesn't matter as much if they're lower strength compared to some units. I suspect, they'll be very dangerous early, and then like some of the really late tier units they might not be quite as good against. It will make the Chinese very effective at taking cities, though, because as everyone's noticed in the industrial era, the artillery can be really strong. And they can do it twice per turn, which is awesome. And immediately, what comes to mind here is the Germans, because the Germans get this +3 combat strength on heavy weapons. So perhaps a little bit of a strategy there if you want to play into that heavy weapon synergy with the Germans in the previous era. Interesting. So where are the Chinese? There we go. So this is a bit of an interesting culture. There are a lot of ways to get benefits from all the different things, but in order to take full advantage of everything, you really need to play into a very specific strategy. But if you do play into that strategy, you're going to be really strong. Um, I suspect in like multiplayer, people might just refuse to trade with the Chinese. That could be a very real danger, particularly if you've stacked a bunch of other trade stuff. Yeah, overall pretty good. I'm not sure where I would put them relative to the Australians if I were forced to make tiers right now. They're definitely above the Americans, but it seems so narrow in terms of how you take full advantage of all this stuff. Anyway, I'm repeating myself now, so let's go on to the Egyptians. Okay, so an aesthete. So an aesthete culture, I think might increase in value later in the game because it makes it a little easier to maintain peaceful relations with your neighbors. But the cultural blitz is still really not that good. Right? Trait, Valley of Kings. +4 influence on emblematic districts. So I assume this is every emblematic district that you have. So that's going to be a lot of influence. The stars scale up really hard in the later eras, And influence can get kind of hard to generate around the pre-modern, going into the industrial, and presumably in the contemporary as well. So this is really going to guarantee that you're able to hit your era stars, which is good. All right, we're really going all in on the influence. So +3 influence per adjacent district, and another +3 influence on emblematic districts. So even if you just put two of these down in one city, you're getting +10 influence on all your emblematic districts, presumably including the archaeological dig itself. Okay, so really going hard on influence here, which in my opinion is a detriment. You only need enough influence generation to hit your era stars, because once you have enough influence to do that, the rest of it is redundant. There isn't really anything to spend influence on. Like, you can combine cities, but the cost of that is so outrageous that you're probably only going to do that maybe once in the entire game, unless you have very, very similar infrastructure between the two cities. Archaeological dig, just more, it's betting more on influence. Yeah, I mean, I see what they're going for here. And it helps you get, like, cultural dominance. I know there are a couple that, let's see if there's an article on this, sphere of influence. Yeah, so with the Statue of Liberty, you get the extra money on territories under your sphere of influence and the extra science. And I think there are a couple cultures that have some sphere of influence effects, but I don't recall what they are off the top of my head. So maybe with this could be really good if you have the Statue of Liberty and you have those cultures that combine nicely with those sphere of influence effects. So you're getting more stuff from your other effects for other people basically being absorbed into your culture. But overall, I'm not super impressed unless there's some new way to use influence that opens up in later eras. There's also the possibility that there could be like a really powerful contemporary era wonder. And as you claim wonders, the cost of that goes up. So if you've claimed a lot of wonders throughout the game, this could be useful to, take advantage of a specific wonder you want. But way, way less versatile than pops or money or production. So let's look at the free officers here. Okay, so they're a gunner. They have this trait, anti-colonialism. So allied units gain a combat strength bonus when attacking stronger units. One population, 720 production, which is pretty cheap relative to some of the other ones we've seen. 58 combat strength, so it is lower overall. Okay. I do... So does this apply when an allied unit is attacking something stronger than itself or something stronger than the free officers? And the other thing I want to know is whether or not this applies based on your base combat strength or your modified combat strength. Because if it's based on the modified combat strength, then it is going to be less useful overall. Because when you're in a situation where you played well in order to get an advantage, say from like terrain or something, or you're behind fortifications, you're no longer going to get that effect. So if this applies on base combat strength of units, it becomes a little better. Let's see. 4 movement and 4 range. 58 strength, I mentioned that already. I'm not a fan of like these things that rely on having lower combat strength. It's in a way kind of similar to the Aztecs, where they don't take penalties from low health on their units. Yeah, I don't know. I think we need to know more about the units in this era to really make a judgment call on this. We have seen some of the strength of some of the other things in here, like the Australians' PMV was 64 combat strength, And I think even the Chinese sort of rocket launcher kind of thing was higher strength as well, so 60. So it seems like you'll probably be able to reliably get that bonus against. Let's close some of these tabs. You'll reliably be able to get that bonus against most of the other emblematic units, which is good. It boosts the power of your generic units, but I'd rather have a generic unit that I could take, or an emblematic unit that is comparable to other emblematic units. I think we'll have to see. We'll have to see. I'm gonna reserve judgment on the free officers here. So Egyptians overall, yeah, I think they lean a little too much into that influence. It just doesn't provide you any versatility, unless there's some crazy thing you can do with influence in the later eras that this opens up. The one possibility I should mention is that aesthetes can maintain a bigger empire fairly well because that influence lets you go over your city cap and still get the era stars. But I don't know. I'm not seeing it here, especially not compared to the Brazilians or the Australians or the Chinese. Let's see, the Indians. All right, another aesthete. I've talked about that a bit already. Plus 10% money per number of territories in your sphere of influence. Okay, that makes a little more sense with the aesthete, but I'm not seeing any way here to generate influence to spread your culture. This all seems a little backwards to me. Okay, so this can be really good, this economic elephant trait, right? If you have a really strong culture that you've spread to a ton of territories, man, that is so good. That's probably better than the Chinese at generating money, and not by a small margin. Because presumably this applies to all of your cities and all of your money production. It doesn't say it's like just in the capital or something like that. Yeah, that's incredible. Okay, so wow, you can really scale your money with that. This is probably the best trait that we've seen so far. Okay, I can't move on from that. Think about the value of that with the previous merchant cultures, particularly something like the Dutch, which get that insane money from the VOC warehouse. Yeah, you can be an absolute powerhouse. And then if you took like the Carthaginians before that, you're totally not reliant on trade at all. You're totally just able to uh, build up your own money without having to worry about other players ruining your trade routes. Okay, so the Ashram. Plus one faith per pop, plus three faith per adjacent district. Interesting. This is something I was thinking about before, actually, which is the Teutons, because they're another faith culture, and you're getting that plus one money and plus one science for every pop in your territory that follows your faith. So you're incentivized to spread your faith as well. So what this is telling me is that this leads into a very passive play style where you've spent some time in the previous eras really generating a lot of culture and faith in order to take advantage of some other effects that those provide. And then when you enter the contemporary, you can get this massive money boost to really do whatever you want with. And this faith just helps ensure that your religion continues to be dominant. See, do we know anything else about this? I will caution that at this point in the game, all the tenets are probably going to be taken. So you're really just building this in order to continue to battle your faith out and push it out into new territories. Against the AI, it might not be particularly effective. We'll have to see how religion scales into the later game. All right, what do we have here? The peacekeepers and the emblematic units. All right, so they're a gunner. They are peace protector. Bonus combat strength for each war declared on their owner. Does that mean current wars or all wars that have occurred, like since the start of the game or since the start of the contemporary era since you built the peacekeepers. I need more info on that. I'm going to assume it is active wars. Okay. So 57 combat strength, 720 production. So that's in line with the Brazilian unit that we saw earlier and the free officers. 57 combat strength, I believe, is a little weaker than the Brazilian sort of jungle brigade. Typical stuff here, 15 upkeep, etc. All right, so 57 combat strength. So like, yeah, I'm not impressed by this. So if we look at the free officers, they have 58 combat strength, and then when they're fighting units that are stronger than them, they get +3, which helps with their scaling a little bit. They stay relevant for longer, even if your enemies are getting stronger. These peacekeepers, you have a base of 57. I mean, I guess I'm assuming this is +1. Maybe it's like +2 or +3. But if it's +1, you would need like, 4 wars declared on you to be equivalent to the effect of the free officers, which I don't think that's very realistic. Now, if you get like a +3 bonus for each war declared on you, that is a lot better with a 60 combat strength from just one war, and it will help prevent. Critically, it'll help prevent enemies from dogpiling you. So I can see a really specific use for this in multiplayer where you're really far ahead in a game and you want to prevent your opponents from knocking you out, right? Because these peacekeepers are going to get better and better the more people dogpile you. Okay, so that tells me everything I need to know about the Indians, which, like I said before, they have this really passive playstyle. They're trying to get to the end of the game largely through having accumulated a large amount of this early sort of passive dominance and then using that to propel them to their final victory at the end of the contemporary era. And these peacekeepers with this peace protector, they might not be useful. It's all going to depend on the scaling of this effect. But if it's a decent effect, it can really help prevent your enemies from getting on top of you and trying to dogpile you to knock you out of the game when you're already ahead. So yeah, that's the niche these guys fill. Okay. You might not be able to build towards this specifically. Like if you really focus on influence earlier in the game, like if you go for an influence and faith game, you might be fairly far behind some of the other cultures. Because the influence and the faith don't really keep pace with the other outputs like food and science and production. They're less useful. So I think this is going to be one that you take opportunistically and not one that you build towards specifically. I'm not sure how I would rate it. Again, I want to see how this all plays out. Okay, so let's look at the Japanese. Okay, so they are a scientist, so they have the usual stuff. This isn't going to be useful, presumably, because there aren't any more eras after the contemporary era. So, all right, trait, blossoming innovation. There's nothing here. I do recall from the Humankind subreddit that I think this unlocks buyout on technology. So that means you can use some money to buy out techs. So obviously a natural combination with sort of some money generating cultures there. Emblematic quarter robotics lab. Okay, +10 industry, +10 science. You get industry and science per adjacent district. And then on city or outpost, you get a researcher slot and a worker slot. Interesting. Does this act as a science quarter for the bonuses? It does. Okay. That changes my opinion of this a little bit. So I looked at this and thought that, this might be kind of bad. But I think what you do with this district is you go through your cities and you could build new ones, but I think because you're going to be kind of stability limited depending on the cultures you've taken, you might use this to just replace your existing research quarters to get a boost to science and industry because they're already going to have those districts adjacent to them since you built them so much earlier in the game. So you can get a little boost from that, and it'll give you that worker slot as well to allow you to keep utilizing your pops. I'm see the thing with the adjacent district stuff though is that if you're building these brand new in your city, right, they're going to be on the edge of a well-developed city, and because of the scaling cost of districts and just overall cost increase in the beta, it's made them a little more difficult to get your full adjacency from. So I think this is one that you're gonna plop down on top of other districts, and that'll save you some stability. I don't think it's more useful than some of the other ones we've seen so far. Okay, let's talk about the unit, which is the Ryzen. I'll call it the Zero. Okay, it's a fighter. Patrol aircraft, able to provide vision and counter enemy aircraft. Can strike ground targets with reduced efficiency. Okay, so it can go up against ground targets, but will have a strength penalty. Light. Destroyed if a single attack ever removes more than half of the unit's health. So something would have to have like 70 combat strength in order to do that. So let's assume that the Lightning is the highest combat strength unit, like air unit in the game. 66 combat strength. So what would you need to get up to 40? You would need, say you took the Hittites, and then you have a level 3 veterancy on the Lightning. That would get you up to 70. And that would be enough to do half damage, I believe. Let me double check the calculation on that. Combat damage. Let's see. Yeah, so each point of difference increases the damage dealt by 5. So base damage at equal combat strength is 20 to 25. So you only need to increase, let's say at best, you only need to increase your combat strength over the other unit by 5. Okay. So really, this thing can get one shot by the Lightning, which makes sense. This is an earlier tier unit. What's this tell us about the tech tree? So this seems like something that is going to be used for aerial dominance, sort of like mid-contemporary, and there's probably going to be a generic sort of jet unlock later in the game. Obviously, the light feature here is going to prevent you from using it too long. This one's interesting. So we don't know the production cost. I assume it's not free. 2 oil and 1 aluminum. A little more achievable than some of the other ones we've seen. So I'm of two minds here. The first is that units that have a replacement in the same era, you get less use out of. But in this case, you're incentivized to not be using it for very long. And as a culture that is a scientist culture, you're going to be teching up faster than some of the other cultures. Presumably, you're going to make use of that buyout. So I guess this is a defensive unit. I see it as it's something that establishes air superiority for you, so your enemies can't utilize their sort of mid-contemporary aerial units against you. And it seems like it'll probably be pretty effective at that role with a 60 combat strength. Okay. Okay. So the Japanese. If I had to rate them right now, I think they would probably be my lowest tier science culture. And because this +1 era for research, it doesn't matter anymore. This robotics lab strikes me as being a little bit weaker than some of the other science. It does have the advantage that if and when you complete the tech tree, you're still getting a benefit from it. You can buy out techs, though. We don't know what the cost of that is going to be. That could be really good with Carthage, assuming that buyout reduction applies there. And, if you picked up something like the Dutch later in the game, that could be really potent as well. Yeah, Interesting. This again seems a little more all over the place than some of the cultures in the earlier eras. I'm not quite sure what to make of it yet. I'm definitely not sort of writing it off like I am about a lot of the American features. I just don't see how these three things all come together to make like a cohesive cultural identity. All right, that's enough about the Japanese for now. Let's move on to the Soviets, who look like expansionists. Okay, red tide. Modify unit industry cost by minus 25%. Okay, so this is just a worse version of the Mycenaeans again and equal to the Aztecs. So you could potentially stack all of those up and get like minus 75% industry costs on your units. But honestly, like if you have minus 50% industry cost, that's so good already that you might as well take another culture in the ancient or the medieval era. I definitely prefer the Mycenaeans over the Aztecs. Let's see. Atlantic Quarter Arms Factory. Plus 5 industry, plus 5 money, minus 10 stability. Creates a new deposit of weapons which is automatically exploited. Okay, so you're producing a new good of some kind. Minus 10 stability per weapon on all cities. Plus 1 combat strength per weapon on unit. Okay. Let's ignore this, because that's not really relevant by this point in the game. So what you're doing is you're trading off 20 stability in one city and 10 stability in all the cities that you haven't built this in order to get 1 combat strength per weapon on unit. Immediately, my mind here goes to the Italians. So the Italians have this trait, plus 10 stability on commons quarters, which means when you're creating your commons quarters, you're effectively providing the upkeep you need in order to have the arms factories. And because it's this legacy trait, it's always going to be relevant. You can just build like arms factory and then the commons quarter, arms factory, commons quarter, and you're offsetting the penalties from this arms factory, which allows you to create a ton of these weapons to ultra buff your units. That's really interesting. Let's see how this looks with the red army tank. Look a little closer at this. Okay, strong against close range attacks, has the armored vehicle. I talked about that already. Flood, produce 2 at a time. Oh, and 720 production, 60 combat strength. The resource requirements aren't outrageous either. Interesting. Yeah, let's compare this to the PMV real quick. All-terrain PMV. Let's go like this. Okay, so the resource requirements are a little less strict on the Red Army tank. Look at that production difference, though. 720 compared to 5,670. Look at that difference. It's almost 8 times as expensive to build the PMV. And then these Red Army tanks, you get 2 of them when you build them. You get 2 of them. Let's see, movement is about the same. Range is the same. Okay. Wow. These have some crazy potential because you can get all those arms factories to really boost these up. Right? So if you have 4 arms factories in your empire, your base combat strength is the same as this unit that costs 8 times as much to build, and you're building your units 2 at a time. I don't think this production cost is going to stay. That doesn't seem accurate to me relative to the strengths of this. Like, this doesn't get enough to justify that kind of production cost. Interesting. Okay, so obviously the Soviets here very much geared towards a very strong military game at the end. Has some obvious synergies with the Aztecs and with the Mycenaeans at the very start of the game. you probably don't need it that much if the industry cost on this is accurate, because at 720 production and with that flood trait, you can build like 4 to 6 at a time in a city, even without any industry cost modifications. And then this arms factory is super interesting. And I know I mentioned the Italians already, but the Austro-Hungarians as well have this Opernhaus, right? Which gives you +2 stability per adjacent district and just a flat +1 stability per district. And then even if you've taken the Zhou earlier in the game, that gives you that +2 stability on a district. That can be really effective. You can get such a massive boost to your combat strength. Crazy. And then obviously it synergizes really well with the Red Army tank, which is a lower strength unit, but you can produce really quickly. And then you can produce them faster because your industry cost is modified. All right. I've seen enough here. Based on what we know so far about combat, I would 100% put this above the Americans. I would probably choose them almost every single game that I play. Stability is a little bit of an issue later in the game, but you have more ways to counteract it with commons quarters, and particularly if you've taken one of these cultures that I've talked about, and I think the Italians, and I'll bring them up again, are the prime contender here, because you get this +10 stability on commons quarters, you can produce them for cheaper, and you get your normal adjacency as well. And you take the Italians into the Soviets, man, you're going to have a killer end game. You definitely have the potential to wipe out like the entire map with this, depending on how this armored vehicle plays with fortifications and all that kind of stuff. All right, let's talk about the next one, which is going to be the Swedes. Let's see what we have. All right, the Swedes. +10% science per number of territories on city or outpost. Okay. That's a lot of science. So if your city has 5 territories, you're going to get +50% science. Immediately here, the Umayyads come to mind, because you have this Grand Mosque. So you're getting more science per number of territories already, so you're likely to have a lot of territories. And the other one is the Maya back in the earlier eras, where you're getting that +3 industry for number of territories. So this is just farther enabling that really tall playstyle. And that's a massive production boost, or science boost, I should say, but significantly better than the French. I do wonder how difficult it's going to be to research the contemporary era texts, given like the massive bonus this is. The issue you might run into with the contemporary era is that once you finish the tech tree with a science culture, your science bonuses aren't providing you anything, right? So you have to make use of the tech that you unlock. Okay, research +3 science per district. Holy cow. Wow. Okay. The okay, so the Swedes, by far the best science producing culture we've seen so far. I mean, not even the French or the Joseon can stand up to this. That is a lot of science. You should be rushing the tech tree down really quick with these guys. So let's take a look at their unit here, the Stealth Corvette. Okay, cannot be seen except by adjacent units, strong against close range attacks. 56 combat strength. Okay, so it is a naval unit, has a little more range. Is it a gunboat? I don't know if it can attack. Let's take a look at U-boats. Or is it just U-boat? Yeah. 52 strength. Okay, so it is a little bit stronger. This has a little resistance to ranged attacks. It has that same effect with the stealth. I was just comparing this to see how much of an upgrade it is. And I think these might be able to attack units on land as well, but that remains to be seen. Obviously, Sea units, as we've seen so far, are not very good. They may get a little more important in the contemporary era because what we've seen with a lot of the geography is that we have a couple separate continents, and you have a couple expansionists in this era that are going to be looking to take over a lot of territories. So the stealth corvette may be able to ward off some threats to your mainland from some of these larger cultures that may be looking to intrude on the continent where they don't already have a foothold. But I still would have preferred a land unit here. So overall, the Swedes, yeah, I mean, it's science. They don't really do anything else. But that can enable them to get, whatever infrastructure they need to get their Aerostars out if there's more infrastructure in the contemporary. It can enable them to get whatever powerful units exist. And I think probably importantly, there will undoubtedly be some kind of tech for like nuclear technology, right? So it allows them to get a deterrent online faster, and they can use it offensively if need be. So you have to use these guys to take advantage of your technology advantage. And in order to do that, you probably want a pretty solid production base as well. So picking some builder and probably some agrarian cultures in the previous eras are going to suit you well here. Okay. Finally, we have the Turks, who are another agrarian civ. So we don't have any militarists. We just have expansionists. Let's see what we have. Traits. People's Reform, +5 food on districts. Wow, that's a lot of food. And +10 stability on districts. Okay. +1 science per population on the public school. -10 stability, but that's canceled out by this +10 stability and +1 researcher. Okay, so this is basically just the French emblematic quarter in a later era. But you're an agrarian culture that's going to have a high population, so that's pretty good. +5 food on district. That's quite impactful. I mean, if you have 40 districts in one city, you're looking at 100, no, not 100, 200 food, which can support, it depends on what culture you are, but maybe something like 12 to 15 additional population on top of what you already have. And if you're, making, say, 12 production per worker with an extra 15 pops, it's an extra 180 production in your city. And then with the stability, you're really totally unchained from the need to have stability. Like, you don't need to worry about commons quarters or anything because all of your stability penalties are totally canceled out. So you only have to worry about stability from attached outposts and admin centers. That's really good. So these guys are actually the builders of this era, not the Australians, because you can just have an unlimited number of districts and it's never going to cause any issue. But this is where it's a little unclear. Does it mean +10 stability on districts that produce stability? Or is this actually +10 stability on all districts? Because that would be crazy. So you're going to have an easy time getting your builder era and agrarian era stars here. You're going to have an easier time getting your science era stars. Let's look at this thing. That production cost can't be right. Consume to perform a single strike action on a distant target. Aerial stealth can perform anonymous strikes. +70 combat strength, 3 aluminum, 1 oil, 1 uranium. So, okay, this does tell me something about this aerial stealth, because when we looked at the Americans' emblematic unit, we thought, maybe enemies can't shoot back at the air unit or whatever. What this tells me, because this is a single strike action, so it's going to consume the missile when you use it, which means this would really serve no purpose, whether or not your enemies can damage your unit when you shoot. So maybe what this tells me is you're actually able to perform strike actions against people that you're not at war with. And that no one's gonna, no one can tell who it was. I don't know. That's interesting. So 70 combat strength, which is pretty high. Um, 30 range, so that's pretty significant. I wonder if this has to be shot from an airfield or if it can be shot from like a city center or whatever. Zero production can't be accurate. Um, that's got to be significantly more expensive than that. Yeah. So, you'll be using some production to get like a single strike. I do wonder if there's like maybe an area of effect or if it's just a single unit. Because this does have the potential to one-shot some of the lower tier units in this era. So it'll be effective against that. And with your tech, you can get up to it a little earlier. Overall, what do I think? I think this will be fairly effective, actually. I'm not sure I would. Let me remind myself of the Brazilians here. Yeah, I'm not sure I would put them into the same tier as like the Brazilians and maybe not even the Australians, but potentially the Australians. But overall, they seem pretty effective at making use of like big cities with big populations. It's, yeah. So, who would I put at the top of the list and who would I put at the bottom? So, I think looking at it right now, the Americans take the bottom. Um, and that's largely due to this stuff right here, which isn't as important. The lightning may be a redeeming factor, but this may have like the same issue as Praetorians in the classical era, where they just come out too late to be impactful. And unlike in other eras, there's no future era to make use of this. So this lightning has to be really, really good to boost this up. As far as top, I would argue that the Soviets could take that. Perhaps the Brazilians, maybe even the Chinese. It just kind of depends on what play style you're going for. And that actually I like that. It's makes it a little more interesting what your actual choice is because a lot of the cultures before this are very focused on like one single item. And these really allow you to combine cultures in unique ways and have a really effective contemporary era culture. So those are my first impressions from what we've seen so far. I'll be adding some more thoughts on my tiers later on this week for the pre-modern and industrial eras. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys soon.